Hello, hello, hello. We are live. Hannah, I don't know whether you probably watched the Rob one. You said you just did.
I
You would have
did, yeah.
seen me ramble for the last kind of first 1 minute, just because you need to give people time to turn up. And so this period is
This
always
is a ramble.
this is the ramble you're now experiencing. And I feel like I always keep it in as well, just because I feel like it's part of the podcast now. It's just getting to hear me talk and trying to fill space isn't always fun. But how are you?
I am good, thank you. Yeah, today's been a good day so far.
Nice.
I'm working on lots of exciting projects at the moment, so I feel quite motivated.
Mhm.
And I love it when the weather's like this. I like it when it's really cold and dry. So yeah, I'm feeling good.
I don't know how to respond to that. If I'm honest with you, you like it when it's cold. I
I
mean,
do, yeah.
yeah.
Getting wrapped up and getting outside for a nice walk when it's like this. Obviously, it doesn't beat a hot summer's day, but it certainly beats the rain that
Okay,
we've
look,
had
okay,
of late.
thanks. Okay, you are a normal human being
I
then.
am, yes.
Whatever normal is, but yeah, no. I don't mind the cold. I don't like it when it snows. I worry about people crashing into my car.
It's just disruptive, isn't it? We're just not set up to cope with
No,
snow.
at all, at all.
No.
So there. Well done. You experienced the first ramble. So it's 1 o'clock. We are here on the Wellbeing Chat podcast. Oh, Stu has already turned up. Can you see that?
I can, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, I'm not going to make any promises, Stu. You have just reminded me. After last night's performance, though, we won't talk about it too much. Anyway, yeah, we're on. See, this what happens. I get distracted. We're here talking with Hannah Pearsall from Hayes, and going to talk some cool stuff about wellbeing. I'll stop being distracted. Before we get into that, and before I get Hannah to say hello properly, I'm going to do my intro just to get that boring piece out of the way. So, who am I? I'm Richard Turner. I am the Director of Employees Health. I'm a high performance executive coach, alongside being a wellbeing coach and specialist, and an educator, as well as a mental health advocate and a podcast host. We do lots of different things to help companies through coaching leaders to be their best selves, helping employees manage their well-being, and ultimately making work a better place to be, and giving people focus to perform at their best. That spiel changes every single time I say it. Anyway, Hannah, hello. How are
Hello.
you?
I'm well, thank you. Yeah, as I said, I'm very good at the moment. Glad to have had a nice break over Christmas. Feel excited for what 2024 has to hold, and I'm working on some exciting projects and things at the moment, which are making me feel pretty good.
Awesome. Tell us a bit more about you, in like a short hello as such.
Okay, so the nutshell version
Yes, not job.
is I am the head of wellbeing for Hayes. Hayes are a big recruitment consultancy. Sorry, I have been at Hayes for my entire career, so I think we're on 23 years this year. But thank you, only been responsible and involved in wellbeing probably since about 2019, and head of wellbeing for the last couple of years.
Nice. Thank you. I think that's quite impressive, as I don't think many people stay within their organisations for very long anymore. They're trying to work their way up the ladder, and they do that normally. Or one of the best ways to do that now, it seems, is to do this and get
Yeah,
recognised.
that squiggly career.
Yeah, exactly. But it's nice to see people who stay committed and have that passion and purpose for one company.
Yeah, it's been easy in truth. I've been very fortunate that every time I've got to the point where I've thought, actually, I'm ready for a new challenge, I've been able to find that challenge within Hayes. So I've never felt the need really to look elsewhere to sort of get that next step, which I'm really grateful for.
Yeah, nice. That's awesome. So you had the kind of the intro. Now it'd be nice to find out a little bit more about you. Can you give us the kind of the full story to why you are here today and why you are the head of wellbeing at Hayes, and what you've been up to get to where we are now?
Yeah, of course. So, as most people do within our organisation, I started as a trainee recruitment consultant. So, I started off placing accountants in our Coventry office back in 2001. And I can still remember the first temp that I placed now. I think he was on about £4.20 an hour, which was about the same amount that I was being paid as well. So, that was sad. Um, but I progressed sort of through the traditional route really at Hayes in terms of consultant, senior consultant, manager. And it became evident that actually it was managing people that was what I really enjoyed doing. So I went down the route of managing a couple of teams, and then a specialism and then a region. So I was a director in the Midlands looking after what was called our office support business. So recruitment of things like administrators, PAs, secretaries, etc. And I really enjoyed that. Absolutely loved it. Running 16 offices across the Midlands in a full blown sales role. And I did that for many years and was very happy doing that. Simultaneously, in my personal life, I grew up obviously at Hayes. So I came from uni, met my husband to be, got married, then had a couple of children. And my life got turned upside down overnight 10 years ago when I lost my husband, who died by suicide. And whilst I had known he'd been very ill in terms of his mental health, it still came as an enormous shock, as I'm sure it won't surprise you to hear. I was actually on maternity leave at the time. My daughters were 3, and my youngest daughter was only 6 months old. And I was sort of faced with this just insurmountable position of, oh, what on earth am I going to do? The rug had been pulled out from underneath me. So I had no choice but to go back to work and to go back to work earlier than planned because all of a sudden I was responsible financially, emotionally, everything for my girls. So went back to work and Hayes were incredibly supportive at what was clearly an incredibly difficult time. But it led to a real journey for me of personal discovery because I hadn't really considered mental health as a concept or well-being prior to that point, my own, should I say, because I was very much the kind of person that left everything that was going on at home at the door when I got to the office each day. And actually, the office was sort of my sanctuary where I just got on with my job and didn't really give too much thought to everything else. But not surprisingly, I then went through a couple of years of navigating being a single parent, trying to juggle having 2 very young children on my own, nursery runs, full-time job, the pressure of running a big region for Hayes in a high-pressured sales environment, whilst navigating grief, and also trying to explain to 2 very little girls how their daddy had died because all of a sudden he was there and then all of a sudden he was gone. So I went on a real journey of self-discovery, and I became hugely passionate about understanding what made me tick, what was going to help me get through this period in my life. How could I make sure that I was in the best possible place in terms of my own well-being? And so over the next few years, I kind of did as much as I could to learn as much as I possibly could about mental health and well-being, and that resulted in me reading a ridiculous amount of books, but then sort of looking at courses. What courses could I do to learn a bit more? And the natural progression of that became to start to sort of look around me at work and think, well, hang on a second, what are we doing to support people in the workplace here? Because what's happened to me, whilst it's terrible, happens to many people. And what do we actually do? Are we creating an environment that's really conducive to allowing people to be the best version of themselves, irrespective of what they've got going on outside of the workplace? And at that time, so 10 years ago, we weren't really talking about well-being in the workplace. We certainly weren't talking about it in a sales environment. We weren't openly talking about mental health challenges. So it was all a bit of a kind of newfangled, who knows about this and what can we do about it? So that sort of started a bit of a journey then internally for me at work in terms of getting on my soapbox at every possible opportunity to talk about why we could be doing more and should be doing better to support people. But I was doing all of that alongside my sales role, um, and then started my campaign to create the role of head of wellbeing within our organisation, which took a few years to do that, but was certainly helped along by COVID. that absolutely proved a bit of a catalyst for us in terms of what we were doing in terms of supporting people, but also how we perceived well-being in the wider context of the workplace. And that really leads us to where I am now. So I'm, let's say, a couple of years into the role of head of wellbeing now. I'm in my second year now of my MSc in workplace health and wellbeing. And I'm incredibly grateful. I feel like I really have tried to make the best of a pretty terrible situation, and a really strong believer in the concept of post-traumatic growth. And that really keeps me going and wants me to, really sort of motivates me to continue on this journey.
First off, thank you for sharing that. I know I think even 10 years after, I think even reliving it can be a really tough process to go through. So thank you for sharing that. The one thing which kind of, as you go through at the start, we've really stood out was that process or concept of mental health doesn't really affect us until it affects us.
Absolutely.
And I remember hearing that and kind of going, well, that resonates with me so much, because I was the same. I was this sports and health fanatic, thinking mental health was what? Nothing really, if I'm really honest. To then going, I had a friend complete suicide, and I was like, oh, well, he was everything I said couldn't suffer with mental health. And so it really opened my eyes up, and I went down that same journey of self-discovery of who I am, what my kind of mindset, mental health was, along with the understanding and actual reading of lots of different books around psychology, mental health, how we be our best selves. So I was a kind of similar kind of story in regards to the PTG, the post-traumatic growth of something like that. So thank you for sharing. Thought that was interesting. And I feel sure over the next kind of, I don't know, half an hour, I'm going to begin to understand exactly what you've been doing between that kind of period within the workplace, because self-discovery and all that kind of self-improvement, as it sounds like you've been doing lots of, is awesome. But I think the workplace stuff is going to be really interesting for people to learn and understand of how you've been doing that within a recruitment company, which has different challenges to others.
Yep.
We were talking about this just before we went live, and so we'll definitely kind of bring to light some of those challenges and how then you've been looking after that as well. Ryan, thank you. Hello. I hope you're avoiding tunnels really well. And I agree with you, massive respect. If you have any questions throughout as well, I've got to say that please just add them to the comments. And if they're nice questions, I will ask. I promised Hannah I wouldn't throw her under the bus today. Anyway, so head of wellbeing at Hays, what does that really include? So obviously we kind of started in 2019. We hit COVID, and so kind of what does it include for you, and what have you been up to?
Yeah. So COVID, as it did within most organisations, really obviously catapulted workplace wellbeing to the top of most people's agendas, and I think that was the first point at which it was seriously considered an opportunity for me to be able to step into that role. What we had up until that point was the beginnings of a number of sort of disjointed wellbeing initiatives. We had some benefits that could fall under the kind of banner of wellbeing. And we had a tiny number of mental health first aiders that had been on some external training, and nobody really knew who they were or what they did. So in terms of the role itself, and bear in mind I carved out the role, so I wrote the job description. I wanted a role that would enable me to have an overarching responsibility for putting together a wellbeing strategy for the organisation. And that would need to be a role that therefore collaborated with a number of other parts of the business, because I'm a really strong believer that well-being overlaps with so many different aspects of a business. It's not a standalone function. It's not something you can do to your employees. It's something which has to be really woven into the culture and has to resonate with all the different kind of departments and functions that you have within your organization. I was also keen to ensure that there was an external aspect to the role, because I think well-being in the workplace is evolving so quickly. And as we said, 10 years ago, yeah, it sort of existed. It was very much more about occupational health and safety and risk management. But this field is evolving at pace. And the only way you can really kind of keep ahead of the curve is if you're constantly speaking to people in other organizations to find out what other people are doing. And I recognize how important that is in this particular role, um, because we don't have people who have been heads of wellbeing for 20 years and can tell us all the things that they've learned. It's a career that didn't exist before. So I think it's really important to have that external angle so that you are able to keep in touch with reality in terms of what's going on in the wider industry. You're able to to be able to effectively horizon scan and see what's potentially coming down the line that's going to be important. And I think it's the best way to learn and to keep ensuring that what you're doing is best in class, really, whether that be within your industry sector, or just looking at other large employers that are multi-sited that have similar characteristics to your own organization.
Mhm.
So it's about having designed and implemented a wellbeing strategy in the first instance, but continually evolving that, evaluating that, really making sure that it's actually having an impact and making a difference, and really trying to ensure that we are creating the best possible environment for people to make positive choices when it comes to their own well-being.
Awesome. My first question is: so you designed your job description. Why was it not way easier?
'Cause that would
Three
have been
days a
way too
week, get paid
boring.
to
Yeah.
train, don't do too much. Go on,
Right.
get paid to go
I
to the
think you.
conferences.
I love a challenge. Who doesn't?
Yeah. Also, we find people like us, especially someone like yourself, are super passionate about actually making a difference. And I find the head of people in wellbeing are all like that because we've all been through something, and
Yeah.
that's probably why we write hard to job descriptions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I love that kind of outlook, and I like the fact that you understand that there's a need for the internal and external side of things. Just because being internal, you can get very inside of it, but when you're listening to others, and I always know that you come along, go to different conferences, you part to different groups, and will come along and ask these questions around what other people are doing, what you can do. So that's a big passion of yours. What's been kind of, I don't know, over the last kind of 3 years, 4 years, what's been the biggest bits of advice or information you've taken from that external, the external side of it, I guess.
Wow. Loads. I genuinely, if I go to a conference, it's a day out of the office. Firstly, so for me, it has to be. I have to come back with something that's going to have been, worth the time spent there.
Mhm.
And I think I really like to, usually on the train journey home, I'll reflect on the things that I've kind of observed during the day, or the people that I've had conversations with, and try and pull out one or two things, because I think sometimes you get all excited at these events, don't you, about all the amazing things you're going to go back and do differently, and then you do nothing. So it's always about what was the one thing that actually could enhance something we're already doing, or actually is a gap that we're not doing at all. And I think I had always, from the outset, been clear on the fact that our wellbeing strategy needed to incorporate a holistic approach in terms of physical, mental, financial, and social well-being. But I think there were, that there's still plenty to do in each of those four pillars. And so I'm just always looking to kind of add to that. I'm
Mm,
trying to think of one particular thing that I think has been a particular game changer. And I can't think of one in particular,
mm,
but I'll keep thinking about that in the background. And if there is something I think it's worth sharing, I will. But I just think there's always some little gems to be picked up from speaking to other people, because most organizations are facing similar challenges.
mm,
We're not unique, and whilst there are nuances between industry sectors and organizations in terms of what might be the biggest challenges to well-being, um, ultimately there's a lot of similarity in terms of the best way to approach some of these things.
yeah,
And I think one of the early conferences I went to that really had a focus in one particular session on talking about going upstream to look at what the sources of the problems are in the first place. And I
mhm,
think that was a bit of an eye opener for me. And that was way before I started my master's, which is all about obviously looking at how you approach everything from an evidence base. But I think a lot of organizations see well-being initiatives and those kind of sticking plaster type solutions as being what should be incorporated in a wellbeing strategy.
Mhm.
But actually, what I picked up quite early on from being involved in the circuit, if you like, is really making sure that you're going upstream and you're looking at what the causes of those issues are in the first place, and that it's the primary interventions that really you need to be tackling. And whilst it's really important that you celebrate awareness days, and they absolutely have a place, as well as the well-being benefits, and people, do like a fruit bowl in the office and some virtual yoga classes thrown in for good measure, they're not the things that are really going to make the difference to how people feel
Mm.
and function in the workplace. So I think that learn came quite early on for me, and of course, that's the hard bit.
Mm.
It's easy, isn't it, to offer some fruit bowls and put on some webinars and all of those things, but actually tackling the root causes of these problems is a much greater challenge.
Yeah, creating psychological safety, getting people to buy in, getting the leaders to understand the value of this and change their leadership
Yeah.
styles and management styles, getting people to engage. So there's a lot, isn't there?
Yeah.
And that just takes time. And actually, sometimes it takes time not only because it's a difficult thing to do, but some people aren't going to buy in. And they need to move on sometimes to create that.
Yeah, and I think it's focusing on the places where you can make a difference from that perspective. Because as we both highlighted at the start, I was one of those people that kind of thought,
Mm.
do we need to be talking about well-being in the workplace?
Mm.
And it wasn't until I needed to talk about my own well-being in the workplace that I really realised how important it was. And I think I see that continuously.
Mm.
I still see that now. We have some managers and leaders in our business that um, you can almost see the eye roll when I start talking about mental health or whatever it might be. But it is something that you don't realize you need to do something about until you do. And I think therefore it has to be a kind of continuous um, communication on this topic, recognizing that you're never going to fully engage everybody at all times, and that's okay. Because again, it comes back to this whole concept of this isn't about us doing well-being to people. This is about us empowering people to enable them to make positive choices that are right for them. And that will change, obviously, in people's lives, dependent on the life stage that they're at, depending on what's going on outside of work. And that's absolutely fine. We just need to make sure that people are aware of what's there for them when they need it.
Yeah, I think with that, as you were talking there, what comes to mind was you said it's not about doing well-being to people. It's about getting people just to enjoy going to the place they work because it's such a big part of their work, kind of lifestyle. So if you can make the place they go and spend 8-9 hours a day in a place where they feel comfortable, safe, and happy, then you're on that path to winning. The stuff you give outside of that in regards to well-being, getting them to be healthier, getting them to be probably healthy is probably the correct word, is going to be a benefit, right?
Yeah, and I think when you even put it like that, you think actually getting somebody to be healthier. So much of that is about lifestyle behaviors. How can we possibly influence what people are doing outside of work? You can't. And I think sometimes there's a real misunderstanding of the responsibility that an employer plays in well-being from that perspective, and I very much view it as a shared responsibility. It's absolutely the case that an organization is responsible for making sure that coming to work doesn't do you any harm, and it would be brilliant if going to work could actually contribute further towards your health. But what you do outside of work probably has a bigger impact on how you are in the workplace. And so long as those basic measures in terms of the elements of psychological safety that we've just touched on, and things that are listed in the HSC management standards, and all of those great things that we know should underpin a healthy culture, the rest is down to the individual.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can do so. I mean, you can do bits, right? You can give them the supports. Still, the motivation from the individual needs it. The managers can role model, I think, and have an understanding. You can provide coaching. So there are elements, but the basic model is yes, actually, the human being still needs to go and do that work to make sure they're doing have the right behaviours in place to be healthy. The workplace is, as you said, ideally somewhere they can be safe and what was the word you used? Safe and something. But if it adds to their work,
Yeah,
adds to their
shouldn't
life,
cause them harm. It shouldn't cause people harm going to work.
that was it.
And if it can contribute towards their health and well-being, then even better.
Yeah, 100%. Um, I would like to look at. I mean, I've got a few things here actually. Um, the start of your strategy and potentially how it's changed to now. So when you started your strategy, what did it look like? How did you start the strategy?
So I think for me it was kind of getting onto paper what we were already doing when I first started, because it wasn't officially my role when I first started looking at it. There were things going on throughout the business that really did contribute towards our wellbeing strategy,
Hmm.
that were being delivered by different parts of the business. So whether it be our learning and development team, for example, or our reward and benefits manager, or our DE&I team that were looking at our overarching DE&I goals. And I think my view has really changed on the link between DE&I and wellbeing, because I was very adamant at the outset that wellbeing was not the same as DE&I, and we absolutely needed a separate wellbeing strategy, and it couldn't just be swept up under the DE&I strategy. And I still believe that, but I believe that the two have to be intrinsically linked, because it is not possible to achieve our goals when it comes to wellbeing if we are not truly achieving an inclusive environment. So I think it's important to have a standalone wellbeing strategy, but I think it's even more important that that feeds into a wider, in our case, people and culture strategy, because it's got to all link together. So really, it was starting by looking at all the different things we were already doing, looking at the engagement that we were getting in some of those things, and looking at the impact and the outcomes of those things that we were already doing. Because and I still know this is, for me, the biggest area of sort of trying to improve our strategy is how we focus on evaluating what we're doing to evolve it to be even better.
Hmm.
We know how hard it is to measure well-being, and it depends, even what you mean by that. So I think defining well-being was an important part of the strategy to begin with, listing out everything we were already doing, thinking about what we wanted to actually achieve. What does good look like? How do we know that we're doing a good job? And some of those things are, tangible measures, but others are much more subjective. And therefore, it's not as black and white as it was in my old world, where it was about how many fees you were making. And you could quite clearly see, yeah, we're making this many calls and we're making this many fees, so we're doing a good job. So it's a bit of a baptism of fire, really, transferring into a world where it's not quite so black and white. But I'm still a big believer that there is data that you can use to understand what you're achieving, and also to drive what decisions need making. You wouldn't make big decisions in any area of your business without data, and well-being isn't really any different as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how that starts and how you're kind of progressing there. What Since kind of that starting point, what's been like the biggest? What do I start with, challenges or do I start with wins? Where do we go? And what's been the biggest wins? What's the been biggest things you go? Yeah, actually, I'm so glad we did that and that, because once we did that, it changed this.
um, it's an interesting question. I think the one thing that was the real catalyst that has led on to then lots of other things was creating um, our sort of well-being network, if you like. So
Mhm.
we have a number of different employee network groups within our organisation, and we didn't have one for well-being, and we have one for well-being, and it's called our Human Champion Network.
Mhm.
And human stands for healthier, unique, nurtured, mentally aware and nurtured. And what we wanted to achieve with our Human Champion Network is to have representatives from all different parts of our business who were passionate about workplace wellbeing. They didn't have to be experts in any way, shape, or field. They didn't have to have experienced any challenges with their own wellbeing. They just needed to be passionate about it.
Mhm.
And what that has enabled right from the get go is for us to ensure that there is a kind of minimum level of noise about mental health and well-being on an ongoing basis, so that it wasn't just, oh, well, it's time to talk day coming up in February, so let's talk about mental health for that day, and then we won't talk about it again until it's Mental Health Awareness Week in May.
Mhm.
It just means that everywhere in our business, I know that there is a minimum level of continuous comms about well-being and the importance of it, and highlighting, the different benefits that people can access or support that they can get if they need to. And that has played really into the kind of cultural journey that we're on around embedding well-being into everything that we do. So I think in terms of the single biggest win, it's probably that. That also is a massive support for me in terms of how it starts as an idea, then develops into something which can influence all parts of the business, but also can be adapted to be relevant to all parts of the business. So some of our offices are tiny. We've got an office in Bath with 4 people in it, and then we've got an office in London with several hundred people in it. So a bit like any aspect of wellbeing, one size doesn't fit all. And what that human champion network enables us to do is enable people in their region and their team and their department who know their teams best to adapt the messages in a way that they're going to land more effectively.
Yeah, I love that. It's nice that you can recognise that one of the kind of big things, and that is network, right? A lot of people talking from the same hymn sheet, sharing the message, sharing the strategy as well. Probably helps.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. And also, the ideas and suggestions, and having that many people around the business who are effectively my eyes and ears, and, what are the challenges that we're seeing? What are we hearing? What do people need help and support with? What's going down well? What isn't being received so well? It's another way of getting feedback and ultimately data to do something with.
Yeah, love that. Love that. And I will ask the challenge question
Mm.
next. What's been the biggest challenges?
Um, just one.
Oh, no. You can have a few if you want.
Okay. I think one of the biggest challenges is addressing line manager interest and capability in supporting well-being. So what I mean by that is I think there's a lack of skills and confidence or confidence in how best to support people's well-being. And there's plenty of evidence to support that. I know the latest CIPD support report talks about the percentage of line managers that don't feel confident in supporting well-being, and I think that is a huge challenge, because you touched on role modeling earlier, and I think that's a very important part of how we articulate what positive well-being looks like. But if your manager isn't doing it, then does that mean you've got permission to do it? And does that mean they don't really believe in it? And how on earth can I possibly tell my manager that I'm struggling when I'm not even seeing them go out for a lunch break? So I think the line manager quandary is one of them. And I say quandary because it's not, some of them absolutely care but don't have the confidence or the knowledge, and others are still in that mindset of, we leave our problems at the door and we come in and do our job. So it really does depend where you are on that spectrum, and therefore that's a really hard challenge to crack.
I also think I think the line manager and manager situation is a tough one, because not only do they have those changes you just mentioned, also the capability and the expertise around actually managing people. How many managers are actually taught how to be a better manager and be a really good manager? Normally, it's the same old story of the people who get promoted are the people who've done their job best. Does that mean they're the better manager, or does that mean they're better at the job they were doing? Is one concept.
We're fortunate with that one in the sense that we have quite distinctive career paths. So it isn't the case that, if you're really brilliant at being a recruitment consultant, then you're going to be the next manager. And there are two very distinctive paths. You either go down the man management route or you go down the business management route. So that helps.
Yeah.
And we do have a brilliant management development program. So from an L&D perspective, absolutely, we are providing what's needed in terms of the management skills. But I think you kind of layer on top of that well-being, and it's seen as an additional hat to wear when actually it's just part of it.
Yeah.
But I think what has made that even more complex is hybrid working. And I think that's another big challenge when supporting well-being in the workplace, because we know people say they want to be flexible and they want to work in a hybrid fashion and they want to spend time at home. but we also know that they need the connection of being with people face to face. And I know we were talking about this briefly beforehand, but we changed dramatically during COVID as a result of that. So we didn't have any hybrid working or home working before COVID. So it was a massive, massive cultural shift for our organisation to go from everybody being in the office 100% of the time to not being in the office at all to now in working in a hybrid style.
Mhm.
And I still think that's a really big challenge in
Mhm.
terms of how you effectively manage people in that way while still meeting all of the business objectives that we need to achieve.
Mm. And I think it leads to the second point that I was going to say about managers is like everybody's very different, and actually the challenges and the support they need is going to be very different. The way you manage those people is very different, and that leads into the hybrid. So everybody wants a different thing from hybrid. Everybody wants a different way of hybrid or flexibility. And so being able to support that, I think it's right. I think managers have got a really tough end of the bargain just because of all those different elements to what it means, as well as
Absolutely.
then the pressures. Not only that's the pressure from below, right? From the team below, the people they're looking after. They've also got these pressures from above as well, who they're just getting sandwiched in between, making sure that people are doing enough and working hard enough. And so then it's managing how do we then do that for each individual.
Mm,
And
it is.
what's Stuart just saying? Bearing in mind some of the grey literature coming out of Australia since making psychological risk assessments law, do we think ISO 45003 will make a big difference in the UK? I'll let you answer that one, Hannah.
Yeah, I think it is a really interesting question, and I think ultimately, I think we are moving much more towards risk assessments and using frameworks. And my own personal view on ISO 45003, when I'm talking to a number of our clients, and indeed when we're looking at it ourselves for Hayes, is that's one almost end of the spectrum in terms of I think there are a lot of organisations that are nowhere near ready for something like ISO 45003. And I think we've got some baby steps to go before we get to the point where that could be, something which may have a greater impact on the UK more broadly speaking.
Mm.
Um, I think that we should be looking to some of these frameworks to make sure that that's what we're using to underpin what we're doing within organisations. And there are so many out there, but the other thing is that a lot of them come with a cost associated, and in the current market, nobody is saying, "Oh, here's an extra however many £1,000 to spend on wellbeing within your organisation." So it's balancing the two, isn't it, in terms of ensuring that budget is being spent in a way that's going to benefit the maximum amount of people within your organisation. And I do think that clearly, if the law changes, then that's a completely different scenario that we're faced with. Um, but it will be interesting to see how that plays out in the coming months.
Yeah, this is interesting, isn't it? As you said, if it becomes law, it changes everything. But yeah, companies aren't thriving right now. Some are, but the majority of companies are just managing the best they can and surviving, right? So
Yeah,
how do you ask them to then try to pay out to do this stuff as well?
yeah.
I had a really good question in my head until I started speaking. This happens to me all the time. Oh yeah, that was my question. So I'm going to ask you a question. So we've looked back quite a lot at kind of wellbeing strategy, where you've been, what you've done, wins, challenges. Let's kind of look to now and to the future.
Yeah.
What does your wellbeing strategy look like now?
So I think there are two or three big things that are important for me at this moment in time. The first is around how we achieve high performance whilst not compromising well-being in a more challenging market, because it's more challenging at the moment, and therefore we've got to be really kind of cognizant of the fact that people are feeling the pressure, even more so than they might normally, certainly in an environment where it's commission based, to ensure that people have got everything they need to perform at their best. So that's the first bit, which links really closely into the second bit, which is I still think financial well-being is absolutely a priority for this year. We're not obviously seeing any huge differences in terms of cost of living going away. So how we can continue to support people's financial well-being, I think, remains really important. And then the final bit for me is around the continued importance and this overlap with our DE&I strategy and thinking specifically around the impact of intersectionality and different life stages. And they're the kind of three really big areas for me, I think, at the moment in terms of what I'm focusing on this year.
Nice. Can you dive into those a bit more detail?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if we start with the, how we continue to drive performance whilst also thinking about well-being, I think there's a real education piece here around understanding what well-being in the workplace means, because I think we've done a lot of work on defining that internally here to enable people to understand that it isn't about the fluffy things and the nice to haves and the extras. It is about creating conditions where people can absolutely be their best. And therefore, if we are going to go through a tricky time, absolutely we need to continue that focus on what do people need then, what is it that's going to enable us to embrace well-being as a critical ingredient to navigate choppy waters, rather than stop everything that's to do with well-being and just crack the whip harder, because that is not going to work. um, and we see that time and time again in all sorts of organizations. So I think it is really important that we recognize that we're not talking about additional well-being benefits or more money being spent or any of those things. This is where we're really talking about things like empathy and positive role modeling, and really just looking after our people from a basic management perspective, to ensure that we're trying to get the best out of them as we go through a difficult time. Feeding that into the financial well-being piece, I think there's a few things here around recognizing that we're not in a position to, be paying people lots of extra money, and I know many organizations are in the same situation. So it's really around the focus still being there from an education perspective when it comes to financial well-being. But I know there's a lot of kind of people thinking, oh, I don't need to be taught how to budget. I know how to budget. I just don't have enough money at the end of the day. So again, it's around what do we have that we can help these people with. So looking at the benefits that offer things like discounts, for example, looking at, we have a mortgage brokerage service that enables people to, look at a better rate for their mortgage. We have a season ticket loan for people that are traveling into the office and want to spread the cost more effectively. We do a lot of work, as you probably know, with Ryan over at Finwell, and continuing to offer sessions that mean people who do want to understand what steps they can take for their particular personal situations and do want to access one-to-one coaching sessions, they can, because all of those things feed into how people feel on a day-to-day basis. And if they're worried about money, then you're not going to get the best out of them in the workplace, and that is what we really need at this moment in time.
Yeah, it was the statistic: 75% of us are financially stressed, or stressed about money. Well, I can't remember what the statistic actually is, but it's similar to that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's huge, absolutely, and we know how closely that links to, all sorts of other potential mental health issues. So it's a really important one to tackle.
Yeah, 100%. And then your DE&I obviously probably makes quite a lot of sense, right? But what is it that you're trying to really integrate?
Well, I think it's really about understanding, is there anything we should be doing differently? So I'm really leveraging feedback and focus groups from our employee network groups to understand, are there any gaps here? What are we missing? What could we be doing better to try and appreciate, for example, if you are also going through menopause, what might you need that's different to somebody who's not going through menopause? And so we have a lot of different drop-in sessions that we run for people within our organisation. So we have a carers one, for example, we have a menopause one, we have a men's health one, and they're just really helpful for understanding. Again, it's another source. It's not, it's qualitative in a lot of instances, but it's data. It's data that we can use to really get under the skin of what's actually happening, and is there something here that we could be doing that's necessary to try and improve people's situation, making sure that there aren't any gaps in how we're doing that.
Yeah, love that. There is, and when you say it like that, you forget around those different links at times and stuff like that, where people, it does come under DE&I. For me, I always think it's just well-being, but actually it does come under that. Different people need different things at different times, and actually that's your DEI, right? Making sure people
Absolutely.
and understand the differences as well, right?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So I'm just trying to think about where I go next with the next question. So we'll look at. I mean, let's ask Tony's question. Rich and Hannah, it's great. This is a great discussion. Living in the world of employee movement. Tony runs an active, total active company, gets people moving. Living in the world of employee movement. I'm keen to get Hannah's viewpoint on an employer's role to support and motivate and deploy mechanics tools to increase employee physical movement.
I think it's a huge challenge. Yeah, this is almost a little bit about what we touched on before in terms of lifestyle and behaviours, because I think I've read lots and lots of academic papers on the negative impact of sedentary behaviour, and I'm sure Stuart will have read many of these as well if he's still listening for one of the modules that we did in our masters last year. And I think working from home is really detrimental to that. I know for a fact that on the days that I'm in the office, I walk far more than on the days that I'm at home, because I'll walk from my car into the office where I've parked. I'll go out at lunchtime. I'll be walking in between meeting rooms, walking to get a coffee. Whereas, I walk from home and I can do like next to no steps at all, because I'm just sat here all day long, apart from when I nip to make some lunch or whatever it might be. So I think there's a piece around kind of raising awareness of the importance of that. I think I read somewhere about sitting being the new smoking from that point of view, that it's going to be as bad for us as smoking potentially, if we continue to be sedentary in the way that we are currently. So I think it's great to have, as part of the kind of suite of wellbeing resources and products that you have, access to things like cycle to work schemes and discounted gym memberships and so on and so forth. But I think it's the little reminders, giving people permission to take their lunch breaks. We try and do initiatives every now and again around physical movement. So we had one that ran in November for Men's Health Month, where we did a walking initiative called um, Walk It Out, and it was simply going for a walk at lunchtime. And we tried to get 1,000 employees over the space of 2 weeks to go out for a walk at lunchtime, to talk about men's health in that particular instance. So it's running, I think, little incentives, like that, to try and encourage and remind people, which can be even more difficult, can't it, in the winter months when we're barely getting any daylight outside of working hours. But I think that's where lunchtime becomes important again.
Yeah, 100%. And when you're working from home, I think it's even more important to remember that lunchtime. Do you find this is just a sidetrack off of that, and as my brain's thinking out loud, that do you see a correlation between managers who are active and the activity levels of that team? So do you find if you've got a manager who's super active and does lots of exercise and activity outside of that, the team is more active as well, and because of the role modeling?
Not well, in some instances, yes, but I think being active in terms of exercise is such a personal choice, isn't it? And I'm sure, like many, I can think of many teams where there's some people that are super fit and healthy and active, including the manager, and then there's people in the team who can't think of anything worse than having to do exercise. So I don't think, I think it helps having a manager who gives permission to do that sort of thing in lunchtime, let's say, for example. But I don't think a manager really has that much influence on whether or not the team themselves are going to embrace that same level of fitness.
Hannah, we're nearly there. I haven't thrown you under the bus just yet. But this last question always gets people, I think. What are your top 3 take-home bits of advice? Yeah, I always get asked whether that's within your role, whether that's just a piece of advice. Probably within your role, just because I think it's
Okay.
a challenging space.
Okay. So number one, I think I would say data is the first bit of advice. Use as much data as you can, and don't think that data, as I say, has to be quantitative. Speaking to people and collecting feedback is just as valuable as looking at things like absence, sickness rates, and the number of people that engaged with your EAP or whatever it might be. I think there is a lot of sources of data that is already collected within organisations that aren't necessarily looked at together to try and help form pictures around where there might be gaps in what you're doing to support employee wellbeing. So I think that's probably my first bit of advice. I think the second piece of advice is be really clear within your organization on how you are defining well-being, and have that kind of mission statement about what you're trying to achieve. And for me, that mission statement also needs to include a degree of who's responsible for what, because made this point earlier, but I'm a really strong believer in the fact that this is a shared responsibility. And I think it's really important that that forms part of your definition of well-being within an organization, so that your employees know what you're expecting, and know what they can expect from you, but know what they are responsible for doing. And I think having that kind of goal or overarching, as I say, vision for what you're trying to achieve can really help bring that to life for people, rather than them having to wade through your entire strategy to understand what it is that you're trying to do. I think linked to that, I wouldn't be afraid to change that if you need to, because depending on where you are in the maturity sort of journey of your strategy, you'll come across things that you'll think, wow, I hadn't even thought about that or done that. So don't see your strategy as something which is firmly set in stone. It has to be quite agile. And if COVID taught us nothing else, there are things that will come down the track that none of us are expecting. So horizon scanning is really important, and being, I think, agile enough to change things when you recognize either they're not working, or actually we don't have anything that's supporting that. So don't be afraid to sort of change that as you go.
Mm.
And then I think the third thing that I would say, and this might not be what you're expecting, but being ahead of well-being doesn't mean you always make the right choices around your own well-being. And actually, it can be a really hard job sometimes, because you're quite often a bit of a lone ranger, in the sense that you don't necessarily have a team of people around you. You're also quite often hearing about lots of other people's problems a lot of the time, which some days can feel quite emotionally draining. Um, and you do, in most cases, and again, we've touched on this, but a lot of people that I meet that are in these roles because they've been through some sort of personal experience. So they are so incredibly passionate about making a difference in their workplace. But you have to be realistic about what you can achieve in this role, because you are so reliant on loads of other people to make these things happen. And certainly when we're talking about cultural changes, my goodness, there are things that happen over years, not something that you can achieve in a project over a couple of months. So I think it's really important that you're really realistic about what you're able to achieve, but that you are also practicing what you preach in terms of looking after yourself in this role, and whatever that might mean, for you personally. That's incredibly important.
The reason why I smile so much is I think it must be about 100% of the people in your role have said the exact same thing when they come to their top tips of advice.
Okay.
Give yourself a break. Understand that there is, be realistic. It's a very similar kind of message at the end of what this same thing. So completely understand it. Completely, it just made me laugh. I was expecting you to say it first. To be fair, I think everybody said it first. Thank you, Hannah. Three really good, great conversation, great advice throughout. I finished with some three really good bits of top tips, I guess, using data to your advantage, both quantitative and qualitative, clear definition. I like that. I think we can get lost in the shiny stuff, and also having definition on who. I've written down what, who, and how you're going to do things from both the employer and employee standpoint, and then just be realistic on what you can achieve and understand it takes time. So thank you. Thank you everybody for turning up as well. I hope you've enjoyed that. The recording will be on LinkedIn, on YouTube. The next Wellbeing Chat is actually next Wednesday, with Sean Tolram from HSBC, who is the head of mindfulness, and has created a mindfulness kind of strategy within HSBC, which is wicked, very different. So looking forward to discussing that and kind of finding out how he's done that. So yeah, join us then. If you have any questions, obviously message me or put on the comments. But in the meanwhile, thank you again, Hannah. You're a superstar. Stay where you are. But everybody else, have a lovely week and see you later.
Thank you.